Hey guys, welcome to another Homelab Series video today. In today's video, we'll be showing you how to install AWX. So AWX is actually kind of a forked off open source version of Ansible Tower, which I think they now call Ansible Automation Platform because Red Hat decided to kind of switch it up a little bit. But essentially, AWX is a kind of nice GUI interface way to actually manage your Ansible playbooks for deployments across your multiple servers without needing to use a command line. So it's all in a GUI interface that allows you to kind of select, do things, and kind of just manage it from there. I've actually used it personally a lot in my line of Homelab stuff, and it's really easy to use and I can't say to configure actually, because they actually just recently switched. AWX actually switched to the AWX Operator, which actually utilizes a Kubernetes cluster, which it took me a little bit to actually figure out. So, but anywho, this video is sponsored by me, myself, and I. So if you enjoy my content and want to sponsor me or send me some free swagger hardware, my email is in the description below. So, okay, let's get started, guys. All right, so first things first, we will log into our server, root at, I think it was 38 is what root at 38, I think this is what it was. Yes, AWX. So the first thing that we'll need to do is actually install a Kubernetes cluster. So there's a few ways to do this. I'm gonna go down the route of the K3S instead of the K8S, mainly because the K3S is more fully like a standalone Kubernetes cluster all in one deployment, and it makes a little bit more sense for this case. But there's definitely multiple different Kubernetes cluster deployments that you can do where you actually have master and controller nodes and stuff like that. But we're gonna just do it all in one, so we're gonna use the K3S. And the install is actually, you can just get it off their k3s.io website and just grab it there, and it will download and install the latest release of K3S on your machine. So while that installs, we'll give it a few minutes. We will update DNS to make sure DNS is actually resolvable for our new instance. And here we go. We'll update the serial number and AWX in A, not AD, A. And then 172.16.1.38. So let's commit this. Add AWX. Boop boop boop. Okay. So now that should be set. This will take a little bit. So what we'll show you here is AWX GitHub. So they have their whole kind of GitHub repository here that kind of talks about AWS. There is an installation guide. I don't actually follow this to the teeth because the installation guide actually is a little bit different. And I couldn't actually even get it to work fully with the installation guide. So that's why it was a little bit unfortunate and took me a little bit to get. But you will go with the AWX Operator, which is the preferred way that they have here. I used to actually run it in Docker when they only had a Docker instance, but now they have the AWX Operator. So in here, it actually goes through a few things that actually tell you how to install it. But I'm going to kind of ease my way through parts of it, not necessarily word for word, right? So we'll do some of this, but we won't do everything verbatim here. But we will actually do like this part where we actually set up this configuration, which is essentially kind of like a Docker Compose file, but essentially it's a Docker Compose for Kubernetes, right? So what we'll do here, hopefully, okay, system starting, and give it, there we go. Now it should be started. So what we'll need to do now is install a few dependencies because we will be using them throughout this. So we'll install get, make, and JQ. Those are the three things that we'll actually need while this runs. And then we'll kind of just go through parts of this installation, but not completely. So the first thing that we'll do is actually clone the repo. So we'll get clone the AWX Operator repo. Then we will change to that directory. We'll create a variable and export it, and we'll call it namespace. We'll name it AWX. So in Kubernetes, namespace is a kind of what you can call kind of like your, I would say probably it's the closest I can think of it. It's like your virtual private networking like AWS, where it's like this is a location that you can put what you want in here, and this is siloed off on its own. So like you would have, if you wanted like, something else, you would put it in a different namespace if you didn't want it to be able to connect, talk to, your AWX stuff. So that's essentially kind of how like namespaces work. So what we'll do is actually do kubectl create ns for namespace, and then we'll use namespace for the variable, so it'll create the namespace AWX. We will also set the context for the current namespace to be AWX. So instead of being just default, it'll be AWX when we run all these commands. And then we will grab the latest release from the AWX operator. So the reason for this is so that, essentially we will just check out the latest release and use that. So we will now check out the latest release. So you can see the latest release is 2.5.2. And then we kind of go through the documentation. So we'll make deploy. So we run the make deploy that is like right here, do the make deploy. It will start spinning stuff up. So now you can see here, it grabbed a few things for the customization. So we can actually do kubectl get pods and then n for the namespace and AWX. So you can see here that in here, in this pod, it is actually starting to run, and one of the two managers is ready. Now you can see both managers are actually ready. So what we want to do is actually create the YAML file for this, which is essentially kind of like the Docker Compose file if you were using Docker Compose, but this is the Kubernetes configuration file, where we can set the API version. The kind is essentially like the namespace. The metadata is what kind of like the naming of the service that we want. And then the node port, I'm not entirely sure on this, but I think this just means use the existing node port, and we'll just essentially be able to get through there. So I'm not a Kubernetes expert, guys. Okay, so I don't know everything. This is just more findings. I'll probably plan to learn Kubernetes, and then by the time I actually learn it, I'll make a video on it, on how Kubernetes actually works. But in this case, if you're just following along to figure out how to just get it to work for AWX, continue on. So then we'll do kubectl apply -f for the file, and then we'll name it the AWX YAML file. So we'll let that run. So now it'll create all the stuff that needs AWX to run. And this includes like Postgres server, and I think like the application, and then the web front end. So what we can do is actually use the watch command, which essentially will, anything that I put after, it will rerun that command every like 2 seconds by default. So we'll actually get pods and AWX. So essentially, this command will run every 2 seconds, and then it'll give the output here. Watch is a very nice thing if you're just like trying to watch something, but you'll just essentially hit up arrow enter, and then you're running the same command over and over again. So we're gonna stick on this page for a little bit so that you can see things actually spin up. So the first thing that will spin up is the Postgres 13 database. Postgres 13 is actually kind of old now that I think about it, but still newer than Postgres 12. I know some things are still running Postgres 12. So you can see how like the age seconds actually goes up by 2 seconds. So this is gonna take, I think, like about like a minute or two. But essentially you can kind of see that we went from here, this make deploy, skipped all this customization thing. We did the apply, but we did the apply for the file, not necessarily the what's in the manifest. And then we did do the namespace. We created the files, so the actual AWX file is in here. So this is what we essentially used, and then we just selected the specific file name. So we're not using Minikube, but essentially the service, the URL will just be the URL of our instance, and then we'll grab the port. The one thing to note here, though, is there is this that we will need to grab. So by default, when you run this, it will actually create a admin password by default, and it's a randomly generated password that is actually base64 encoded as part of like Kubernetes secret manager, essentially. So we have to run this to get the actual password. Okay. For some odd reason, the Windows terminal isn't updating as well as it should be. But now you can see Postgres started, the task started, which I would count as the application here, and the web has started. So everything is good now. So what we can do here is kubectl get get service and AWX. So the get service is kind of like I would count more as like the Docker ps-a. It would include the ports and everything. So you can see here that the service is running on 80 and it is forwarding to 32732 on our machine. Now, if I knew Kubernetes a little bit better, I could probably set this to be a static port as opposed to a randomly generated port. But in this case, we're going to just go with it. So the last thing here is actually running this command to get the password before we start. Come on. There we go. Decode. So now we have the password. So what we'll do is http awx.dragon.local, and then what was the port again? 32732. 32732. And now this should pop up. All right, there we go. It just took actually a lot longer than I was expecting. So that ended up taking about like 4 minutes before the web GUI actually appeared up. So it took a little bit to load actually. But now we should be able to log in as admin and log in with the password that we had set up here. Well, let's just rerun it, clear out the history and rerun this. Here we go, and log in. So if this is like your first time looking at AWX, this is what the AWX interface looks like. Looks like they also have a new preview mode that you can check out here, which actually kind of looks cool. I was looking at it. I haven't really used this as much, but you can use that and set it to doc theme too. So that is a pretty cool new flashy GUI. So there you go, guys. That is how you set up AWX. I will create some more videos on how to actually use it because that's a completely another rabbit hole, honestly. And I want to kind of give more in-depth sections of how to use it, since I actually do enjoy using it a lot. So that is how you install AWX. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next video. Bye.